SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
I'm an economist. I have some familiar faces in this room. Some of you have attended my class, right? So that's an advantage and disadvantage together, right? So I would like to keep this a bit interactive if possible, so that we engage about the policy framework, right? My objective largely is not to tell you what was the policy, but what policy as an engineer, technology expert you can basically create, and how policies are being created, whether technology has anything to do with it, how to read the data. That means, we have so much of data with us, how to read the data, and what are the challenges that we face today, right? That's why the title, if you look at it, it's called Sustainable Energy, which includes the demand supply energy systems, which basically need a little bit of understanding of economics. Of course, almost every one of us is an economist by and large, right? May not have a formal education, but we know how to spend money, right? And we know how to save tax. These are the two things we know quite well. But now the question is how to save energy, right, for somebody else who is going to come in future, and how to reduce emissions if possible through technology or through advanced engineering approach to create new source of energy or new types of energy. Either you call it a carrier of energy or energy itself, fuel of energy itself, but can we create such kind of a thing? That is the challenge remains with us. Now please read this carefully. It's taken from of course one of the think tanks which largely works on energy related issues. The numbers may not be as appropriate exact, but the philosophy is very strict here. So world oil and gas reserves estimated to just 45 years. It may go up to 50 years or 100 years depending on how exploration happens, but which means that it is not infinite, correct? Same case is going to with coal. Coal is 200 years, it may go up to 300 years or so on, but again it is not infinite. So which means it's a simple, policymakers problem of allocation of resources. Because economist role is to understand how resources are allocated, how efficiently they are allocated, and what policy can tell us in terms of the allocation of such resources, and how the bottom of the pyramid will have an access to those resources. This is the challenge of a planner. So a planner may not be an economist. Again, a planner may be somebody who understands the logic, the science, the numbers, and can forecast, predict, and come up with some kind of a solution where we have equitable distribution, not equal distribution definitely, because it's a different talk, equitable distribution, so that accessibility is not an issue, either for the industries or for the households or for the, agriculture or any sector that we talk about. Now, interestingly, energy is common in everything that we talk. Even when I speak, I need energy to speak, right? It depends on how I quantify that. Now, just deviating from the topic a little bit, all of us have learned or know about something called poverty, right? Of course, we are not an expert. I am also not an expert here. But the basis at which poverty is defined is not based on how much money you require, correct? It's based on how much calorie intake you require per day to survive. Then you translate that calorie intake to food basket, then you translate the food basket into the monetary form and say, yes, Santosh requires, let's say, 45 rupees per day to survive, whereas somebody else requires 65 days to survive, depending on the price raise. So the intention here is energy is everything that we need to understand, either to come up with a development policy or an energy policy by itself. That is where the importance of energy, energy science and energy economics lies. Now, a lot of discussion has been happened in terms of industry, economies and global initiatives of explaining energy efficiency, correct? All of us are talking about energy efficiency in some way or the other. We take various policies for that. We say switch off the light if it is not used, which is a microeconomic phenomena. We say shift to a better fuel type, which is a macroeconomic phenomena. We come up with targets. Now, as an economist, when I look at the slide, for industries particularly, let's start with the industry, then we go on the next two slides. Why do anybody want to reduce energy consumption? Right? Industries don't care about it. Industries' primary objective is profit maximizing. Now, in lieu of profit maximizing, can I reduce some of the input that goes making my profit more, right? That is what is the intention of a industry firm or a corporate house. Now, what are the dimensions in which a firm produces? When I say a firm, you can also think as a company, okay, because there is a difference between these two. Let's not get into the definition part, but let's say a company is there. A company produces a good called X. How is the good is produced? Largely it is produced by 4 inputs. One is called labor input, capital input, material input and energy input. What is the least controversial input to minimize? It's the energy input. Labor input is difficult because labor disruption will come. Without capital you cannot have an industry, and the growth of industry is dependent on how much capital is invested. Material is one of the prime input required for any kind of production happens. So, what leaves us in the production function we call in economics is the energy input that can be tweaked, changed, converted, and all thanks to laws of thermodynamics, where we can do a lot of things, conversion of energy is possible. Now, translate these 4 inputs into the monetary prices, right? Because I am an economist, right? I will always talk about money and how we can maximize through the profit. So, the question here is, when I convert into a monetary unit, the less I spend in my input matrix, the more I gain in the output matrix, that is basically the profitability. That means how much I produce as a gross sales minus my input goes, I get something called a profit. What is my factor cost? How much cost is required for production? What is the market price? I get a difference between the market price and the factor cost, I get a profit. Now, if I can reduce the cost of energy, then obviously on the right hand side I get the maximization of profit happens, right? And that's most important. Every industry will agree on me that you reduce energy consumption in such a way that you maximize profit. Nobody will have a problem in that. But then again, I go back to the previous slide where we have the problem of fossil fuel dependency, where fossil fuels are not equitably distributed across the globe. Right? We always talk about equitable distribution, but fossil fuel is not equitably distributed. So, there are some countries which are happy to have good amount of fossil fuel, starting from coal, natural gas, petroleum, etc., etc. And there is a country, India, which may not have these kind of goods and services, and we depend on something called import, correct? So, we import it from the economies which are producing these goods and services. The best example is OPEC, oil producing economies. They have the, idea of how much they can export to a country called X, and what is the price that they would like to place in that depending on the demand and supply side. Now, when I am an importer as an Indian economy, the price is not I determined. The price is determined by the world market. Not only the world market, but also the governance infrastructure, terms of trade and favorable nation definitions, right? That is how the prices are being determined. And when I import more, what happens to me? My GDP falls, because exporting will increase your GDP, gross domestic product, and import will reduce your GDP, because in the equation of GDP it is a negative sign. The fundamental macroeconomics principle, how GDP is computed. Now, as an economy, that is the next stage, that is the nation. If I have to increase my GDP, I have to reduce my import burdens. I mean, please carefully look at these words, import burdens, tax burden. Why it is burden? Because it goes from my income, right? Now, I import, I depend more on the economy, I don't decide the price, I don't decide the price rise, I don't decide the price fluctuations, volatility, etc. And I depend on economy to basically help me in running my economy, because energy is required for all of everyone, right? Now, when I import it, now I should have economic policies to support the import mechanism. in lieu of import, I must encourage my economy to export. Unless what happens, my GDP goes down. If GDP goes down, then development comes down because per capita availability of domestic product reduces. This is a fundamental economic problem happens not only for energy but also for all kind of products which we import from outside. Now, if an economy can basically look at the availability of energy resources in such a way that they can create a mix of energy basket so that they are not importing more, then it will also profit maximize. That means your income will come, your import will come down, and once your import comes down, you will be able to adjust the GDP values, and which is a sign of economic development. Clear? Now, if all of us do that, that means each economy self maximizes in understanding the requirement of their energy basket. They work looking at the availability of energy sources that can be transferred, that can be used, that can be reused. Then each of this economy would be lesser dependent against a very few economies, where the politics of energy will not happen, or the price politics dependency will not happen, and economy can trade other things instead of trading only on energy, or 100% dependency on energy export for some countries, 100% dependency on energy import from some countries. That comes the case of India again. For example, solar, wind, etc., was earlier there in India. It's not that we invented in last 20 years. Right? What was missing was technology and public policy support for those kind of technologies. So that solves the problem of the nation when an economy understands the fuel mix, come up with some identifiable goal in terms of creating the energy mix depending on the availability and maximizing or increasing the GDP, which will turn in a sustainable development, which we talk about in the SDG goals and etc., etc. That would lead to a global reduction in GHG emissions probably if the energy mix is sustainable. So, to give you an example, if Tamil Nadu is producing surplus energy from RE, is it not a critical policy to include RE as a fuel mix in Tamil Nadu and reduce the non-RE for Tamil Nadu, and states which are not producing or not able to produce RE, they should get the fossil fuels. Right? Some kind of a decentralized policy we talk about. Instead of having a single policy, we can have separate policy depending on the natural resource availability. Now, if you look the entire slide in one, in one shot, then industries are the microeconomic events, adds up to national production system and consumption framework, and then it adds up the global phenomena. And why are we talking about all this? Because we identify that climate change is happening, it is true. The incidence of floods have gone up higher, frequency of events have gone up higher, temperature changes are phenomenally changing over the regions that we have seen. Not only decrease in temperature, increase in temperature has also happened in many of the regions which are directly affecting agriculture and other allied activities and stuff. So, look at Chennai for instance, now Chennai rains almost 9 months, on and off rain happens, right? That was not the phenomena if you look 10 years before what has happened. So, the GHG emissions are creating some kind of a disequilibrium, which all of us know climate change happens, and because of climate change the impact is directly to those people who are not in the bracket of high income groups. That is where the policy are also required. So, it is not only the energy policy helps mixing and creating a better sustainable energy system, but that also helps in creating a better development economic paradigm. So, energy is not linked only with the technology part, it is also translating to the economic development and sustainable development of each and every individuals who are called economic agent. That means all of us are economic agents, and how we can maximize our utility through these kind of new economic policy that can help us. Any questions? Either I am very clear or nobody understood anything. Right? Okay, I will take the first one that I was very clear. Now the question is where we stand. I mean, India stands, right? If you look at the table, it's in million tons of oil equivalent consumption data, classified into oil, natural gas, coal, nuclear energy, hydroelectric, sums up to the total number. Trust me, these data are freely available. You just have to search it and little bit Excel work and you get these numbers, and you can actually come up with different arguments with these numbers. Now, in terms of consumption, if you look at India, we are way below than the US, right? And if you look at Japan, is just above us. So all the developed countries are consuming way higher energy that is required per person, per economy as compared to us. But then why the challenge is to the Indian economy? Right? Already US is consuming almost 9 times, 8 times. So my one argument would be, I will reach US consumption level and then I will decide about my policy, correct? Why would I reduce? Because the moment I reduce energy consumption, it has direct impact on economic growth. Okay, see as a question how, right? You stop producing because your energy requirement is not met. You can't expand your industries. Again, energy requirement is less. So in absence of higher energy, you end up basically producing less. No, that's a good question. So the basic idea is, if I import 1 rupees of energy, I expect to produce more than 1 rupees of output, which I sell it in the export economy. Unless I give it as a subsidized energy to whatever sector is there, right? So there is a standard literature, like, millions of papers have been published establishing the relationship between economic growth and energy consumption. Majority of them found out that higher energy consumption leads to higher economic growth. That means if you consume more energy, you produce more. When you produce more, you export more. When you export more, your economy goes up. Yes,
that's an economy of growth.
Yeah.
The definition for prosperity is always growth. There is no alternative definition of prosperity.
Yes. I mean, in terms of the numbers, yes, because GDP is the one measure which is agreed upon, that it is one that we can look at, but there are other measures have been also developed, and those measures are not as scientific logical as it seems with the GDP figures. And one interesting thing is, all economies do not report their original data, because there is something in the data that people don't want to respond. So my one argument is, I will wait till I consume up to 914 million tons of oil equivalent, and then I will think about it. And that's where the first meeting happened in Kyoto long back, right? Probably I was born at that time, I guess. And countries were invited, and China and India partially signed those documents, partially. US and Japan did not sign the document, even if the meeting happened in Japan, right? Again, the question is why? Why India and China were in target? Is it targeting the economies, or is it some sense is there behind this data, right? The reason is the rate at which we are consuming and the rate at which we are populating ourselves and the rate at which our demand goes as our population goes up, because we do not have a very standard strict population policy, population control policy. So these are the dominated, economies with lesser land available per person, so which is called carrying capacity. So in India we have a less carrying capacity as compared to in the US or as compared to other economies, because per person availability of land is very less, because the population density is too much. So when your population goes up, your demand goes up. From a lesser developed economy, you become emerging economy, so you started getting into industrialization, and your rate at which you consume energy has gone much faster than the rate at which US is consuming. So that means if the low income, medium income countries do not accept policies at this point in time, we will definitely surpass China or US at some point in time in terms of total energy consumption. Therefore, there is a requirement that guys adopt technology, come up with policies, and then you slow down the rate at which you are consuming energy. Again, the question is why, right? Every time please ask the question why. The answer is, as you consume energy, you emit. And low income economies have something called vintage capital. Vintage capital is old capital. Old capital is inefficient, right? Why inefficient? Because technology progress has not happened. Like you bought a laptop in 5 years down the line, I bought a laptop today. Whose laptop will give a better battery backup? Mine. It is a capital. That's called vintage capital because the capital was not augmented, it was not refurbished, it was not replaced. Maybe because the companies or the firms are not profitable to shift their technology. They still depend on the same old technologies and difficult for heavy manufacturing particularly. It's not an easy task to, IITs can simply change their technology, change their laptops and stuff, but for steel industry, it's not easy to completely change the production engineering in one night. You need a higher capital, right? So there are a lot of challenges for them. Now the older companies find difficult to replace the technologies because of limitations of either technology adoption, availability of technology, import burdens, etc., etc. Therefore, what happens? They emit more. So when you emit more, that comes because the rate of consumption has gone up higher, right? You started consuming more and more energy, you emit more and more, you contribute to you contribute to the GHG emissions, which have direct impact on the climate change and the frequency at which climate extreme events happens.
So I have a question. When you say that we do not change the technology frequently, so while changing the technology also we require a lot of, we emit a lot of embodied carbon because a lot of carbon dioxide will be emitted while changing unless and until a material has completed a design life. There will be a lot of emissions. So we, in our case, like when we build a building, then we try to complete, increase the design life so that less carbon dioxide would be emitted in making the whole building again. So when you say that, when you give the statement that we must change the technology and it would reduce the carbon emissions, so how is it that?
Yeah, so it's not we must change, right? Because there has been limitation why our industries were not able to change, correct? So an industry established in 1948 in operation till today, there are industries in India which established pre-independence India and then still operating. It has been difficult task for them to shift to a new technology because every technology has a life cycle. End of the life cycle only you change the technology if required. But that needs a regulation. That is why we were not able to shift to better technology. But unless you shift to better technology, so it's a fundamental problem of an industry not being able to move faster in the technology paradigm. The other part is, unless economic policies are forced, the example I will give you is energy auditing. Energy auditing was not there before 2004. It was not made mandatory for 1,000 companies before last 5 years. So there is nothing called energy auditing. So then what happens? You don't audit your energy, you don't appropriately get into the utility part of energy and you don't care about it. Now when you audit it and send your audit reports, then you are bound to see what are the possible ways out to adopt a new technology. Now the idea of vintage capital comes because capital by its definition will depreciate, correct? Now the depreciation rate at which capital goes down, it will have a direct effect on the energy efficiency that comes down. So the idea is basically before the capital becomes older, you have to adopt technology a priori so that you adjust with the technology movement also. Now in your question there was an interesting word that's called embodied carbon, right? That has become a new discussion at this point in time. Even today what being discussed is when China exports, it also exports carbon. It emits in China, that is correct, but the product itself is coming with carbon because in production it has emitted. So who should be blamed for that? For the consumer or the producer? Right? Or both? Now look at what India exports. India has been exporting agriculture goods and services. Right? That means India has been consistently exporting low technology goods and services other than pharmaceutical products. Textile we export, we are good at that. Rice we export, we are good at that. Except the pharma, which comes in chemical engineering, chemical industry segment, that is only high tech that we export. We are always exporting the low tech goods and services. What is the reason for that? Because we have good number of available labor force who are ready to work at a lesser wage, make profitable, and we didn't have technology at that point in time because tech transfer was not happening as frequently as it happens today. Now, when we export a kilogram of rice, we are also exporting water, right? We are also exporting the degraded soil that goes along with the rice, right? And what is the price at which we trade? We don't add these bad outputs, right? We just look at the international market for rice and export it. So that is embedded carbon export, which is another thing which is discussed in COP27 this time. How to address this problem? If India becomes a manufacturer for all, then India will emit. Now there is a restriction that you can't emit, right? Or you have to reduce your emissions. It can be done only with appropriate tech transfer from countries where technology is already there. We don't need to invest 20 years to get into the technology and we reduce our burden of emissions. So the embedded carbon trade is linked with the COP27 meeting which ended recently that talks about carbon finance. Well, that's a very separate discussion. If any question is there, we can discuss later. So how to encourage this embedded carbon trade and convert into carbon credits and get into the carbon finance stock market, etc., etc. So the idea here is why India is emitting not as the US is emitting, but we still have the challenge because the rate at which we are emitting is a little bit tricky and we may reach the level at which other countries are emitting and it will add negative externality and it will create a problem in the GHG gas emissions. That's where we have to reorganize ourselves in terms of creating economic policy that has lesser trade-off between the policies related to emissions and energy emissions and climate vis-a-vis the development goal of India. If the international market agrees on a per unit of carbon dioxide as a flat rate, then the second option is good because then economies like us will get benefited. But unfortunately, the trading that happens ranges between $8 per tons of carbon to $200 per tons of carbon. Of course, that depends on different, set of production mechanism that we have. But unless that pricing is fixed, economies like us will not get benefited. Anything else? Yes, please.
That is sort of tricky because some industries like production and consumption can differ in pricing in different economies.
Okay, so now the question is who decides the price?
WTO?
No. No. Tea price has never gone between 10 rupees to 15 rupees in last 10 years. Sugar prices has gone up. So the input that comes in making tea have gone up. But tea prices are largely, unless and otherwise you are ordering from something else, right? It is 10 to 15 rupees, max I am talking about. So who decides the price?
People, demand.
It's the market decides the price, right? Now, who governs this market? It's the government who governs the market. So, when tomato ketchup is 200 rupees per kilo, we are fine with it, but tomato cannot be 40 rupees, right? So, that is where the role of government comes in, making the price system in such a way that the reallocation effect will not be a negative outcome. Right? So, therefore, it is not that the government is only responsible. The government, the market forces, the consumers, everybody is equally responsible for the price rise and for the fall down in the price. Now, as an energy economist, what I would request is you must have the price associated with the emission in producing a particular good. Right? Then what happens? The industries will also adjust because they get more money. The consumers will not buy randomly because it is advertised and marketized. And we may achieve a sustainable finance in terms of fixing the prices. So, price element can be taken care of. What is missing in the entire story is technology. Right? An economist can always increase tax, but increasing tax does not solve the problem of the environment, right? And we have to be very clear what problem we are solving. Through carbon finance or through subsidies, through pricing, we are thinking that we will regulate the market. But regulating market is not the prime objective of this entire argument, right? The entire argument, how do we reduce the emissions? So that's where the technology comes into picture associated with the economic policy, not the economic policy associated with the technology. So we must reverse this story and look from the technology standpoints. Now, if you look at the primary energy demand, this is an Indian case between 2010 and 2013, that is business as usual. So the point business as usual means in absence of any policy. We will not change, right? Whatever happens, we will not change. We will consume the way we are going to consume. Then coal is going to be almost like 3 times by 2030. We are nearing to 2030 actually, 4 years to go or 6 years to go. We have committed by 2047. That is the challenge comes, right? Or 2070. Two challenges we have. Unless we have any policy on coal, coal is going to be 3 times than what we had consumed in 2010. That means in 20 years time. So this is the exact point where I was telling that look at the growth rate, right? Now if you plot 2000 data here, it is not 3 times. For an economist, it's a good sign because my economy is growing faster and I'm able to consume more and I produce more. But from an ecological, environmental economist point of view, that I'm going to import more coal or I have to dig more coal from my own reserves. These are 2 different challenges that comes. A third one can be done definitely as the emission that comes here. Now what we are interested right now is if this is the coal is going to be consumed with business as usual, can I reduce the emission at least? Correct? So again technology comes there, right? That how to reduce emission when I consume coal for industrial purpose. So again it depends on the policy. For example, if somebody comes tomorrow and says that I don't care about climate change and I don't think climate change is a scientific process, somebody is there, I will not take the name, all of us know who is that person, right? Somebody says I will do that and I will encourage coal industries to grow, then of course there is no rate at which coal has to grow. Yeah, but there are a lot of other areas where it is not been explored. For example, you figure out a coal mine somewhere in Antarctica and you start digging it. Then I don't think we have to calculate, we are no more, right? So the point here is the 5% growth rate, right? That is the compound annual growth rate of 5% is a challenging one. That means the point is, can we reduce the CAGR? When I say CAGR, it is basically compound annual growth rate in percentage. So if you look at the growth rate, what is happening is even business as usual, we are growing at the rate of 5% per annum. And this is the challenge that we have to think about. I am not arguing that we should stop coal industries. We should not, because coal industry also create employment. And those who are employed in coal industries cannot shift their jobs, right? What I am arguing is what technology can help us making the best out of coal and emit less. Or can you use that emission into some product, right? CO2 comes, today we are talking about CO2, tomorrow we may talk about methane, day after tomorrow we may talk about something else, but can you break that element as chemist and give us some output which is tradable goods? On a very, very lighter note, if carbon dioxide was sold in the market, economists will not talk about it because it's anyway in the market, right? It is discussed because it creates a dent in the environment and non-traded and non-marketable goods and services, there is no price. Now somebody from economics who may not understand engineering and science, if C and O2 are divided without any energy being given, and just like you divide C and O2 and then do something with O2 and do something with C, or CO and O, whatever combination you want, convert into useful goods and services, create an industry, that is a wonderful solution. But the challenge is what is emitted, how to capture it, right? That's what probably you might have attended carbon capture, this, that, etc. So either you control it in the input level or you control it at the output level. Output level is too difficult, non-economical, market is not there, technology are challenging, right? And the question is, what will you do with that? Are you going to come up with some useful products, or you are not able to do even a useful product, but you put it somewhere and then that will create another level of deterioration in the environment which we have not seen it. So the challenge comes in coal, where we need technologies for coal, other than technologies for, of course we need technology for hydrogen, green hydrogen, etc., which is sustainable energy coming up, but we also have to think about this guy called coal, who has been helping us from last 300-400 years of industrialization, what has ever happened, and some technology need to come here. And that's where the economic policy requires that what kind of incentives we can create for industries that we are using coal and achieved a higher energy efficiency. Because it is also not very easy to shift away from coal, correct? Because we are equally importing coal from other economies. Or we can simply export our coal and say that our hands are clean, and then you product and we buy it from you. That's another way that always we can do it, like developed countries are doing. Some of the developed countries are exporting coal, right? And they say that we are clean. That's another way of putting it in the balance sheet. Then if you come back to the renewable energy mix, right? So it's classified into renewable energy in capacity mix, generation mix, and again, as an economist, I would like to get into the employment generation. Because any policy must not disturb the employment pattern or the employability in a particular sector, because the prime objective is basically to make a sustainable ecology with availability of jobs for everyone, so that the income level goes up higher. Now, if you look at the movement between 2019 and 2022, these are the data which is right numbers from the Government of India. 2024 was a projection. So it's not the real number. This was a projection that Government of India has done it. So the idea is basically we can increase the capacity mix up to 50% because we talk about net zero, right? And this net zero is a very beautiful English word, right? I mean, so we started with 2 degrees Celsius reduction some time back. Then we said no, 1.5 has to be agreed. Why this 0.5 difference? Because that will not create a problem in the economic development of economies, not by restricting them to produce from the industries. Then few of us said, look, we are already poor, and if you are going to come up with the reduction of absolute reduction, then it is challenging for our industries. 1991 we created new economic policy in India, which allowed others to come and invest in India, right, which is called the liberalization, privatization and globalization economic policy. Then we eased import duties, we eased export potentials, we come up with special economic zones. Now we are focusing on make in India, which is manufacture in India, right? Now when we manufacture in India, we are going to emit, unless assemble in India. Okay, that can be a new, probably one way of looking at that, assemble in India. Now when you increase your industrial activities, you are going to emit. So then the idea was, let's talk about net zero. Net zero basically is, we are not forcing anyone to reduce the fossil dependency, don't increase it, and you try to add the renewable energy and make it 50%, and gradually you will end up 100% RE if technology support happens. So the idea here is the capacity mix we can increase gradually up to 50%, And the generation mix will again, if you control about 50% of this, then the generation mix will be 33%, which would be able to create 9.1 lakh of employment. Okay, so generation mix is in a thermal power plant. It's a coal based, right? I'm talking about coal based thermal power plants. So if you look at the Indian industries data at the firm level, that means as the micro level data, they have captive power plant where they are using more than one source of energy. That is because of the problem of energy security, right? So they use multiple sources of energy. For production purpose, they use 67 types of energy. 67 type of energy starts from coal, ends with husk. So you have a set of 67 matrix goes, not to all forms, right? They choose their own matrix of fuel mix. So generation mix is one of those where you have multiple fuel type comes in and then you generate energy. For example, there are industries which are using water, right, for heating purpose. And interestingly, if you look at the balance sheet of a firm, the energy data includes electricity prices data and water charges data. Because water is consumed to generate heat or transformed into some form of energy, water is also used as a raw material component. So if you take the data of textiles, water is one of the material that is required, but if you look at other industries, water may be used for heating purpose. So the idea is, unless you add RE in the generation mix, that means we are not talking about completely make RE. For example, you have microgrids, right? Solar microgrids, solar PV microgrids. You are plugging it into the existing smart grids. Instead of creating energy only from the microgrids from the solar PV, you are plugging it to the main grid so that it supports the grid. So that's called the mix. Right? Unless and until we become independent and secure about energy production, distribution through solar PV. Because each of the RE technologies, solar, wind, floating solar photovoltaics or tidal energy, wave energy, whatever you call it, they also have associated externalities which we have not been able to identify at this point. If I ask you a question, is solar PV a sustainable energy completely? The answer is no. You need batteries, right? Battery has life cycle assessment, battery will die at some point in time. The material used in batteries are not plentifully available across the globe. Few people have those materials. Solar PV, again, materials are not available, you have to import from somewhere else. Every economy doesn't have that. End of the life cycle, what are you going to do with those recycled, non-recycled product that comes out? How much area you have for installation of those resources? Because solar PV requires quite a bit of area to install. How are you cleaning those solar panels? Right? I mean, country like us where dust is everywhere and human beings are everywhere, it needs a lot of money to clean those panels, and we have 4 seasons, 3 seasons depending on the state you belong. Number of cyclone visits, which will also create an uncertainty and risk in terms of those installed capacities. So there is a quite lot of problems which we don't want to talk about right now because we are in the net zero, right? So unless a thorough techno-economic and life cycle assessment is done, it is very difficult to say whether one particular technology is completely sustainable technology. So that is the reason we would like to mix it with the main grid, because we are not completely depending on one particular source. We are now supporting the grid with multiple sources, right? So those who do not believe on RE potential, I mean this slide is for them actually, that look, we are able to generate 4.4 lakhs of employment in this sector. And because these sectors will be regulated sector, wage rate will be regulated, benefits will be regulated, and they are not going to be unorganized or informal labor force, but there will be formal and salaried labor force. And you definitely require technological sophisticated employment in this segment, and there is a quite lot of employment that can happen through technology absorption in this case. So which means if I encourage my economy to have 50% capacity increase and generation to 33%, I am able to increase 9.1 lakhs as business as usual scenario. That means with the current energy policy of India which we have, we started from 2004. Before 2004, there was no ministry, for energy and renewables. Now we have new and renewable energy ministry. It was merged with the Ministry of Environment. Then it was converted into Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Then we have a ministry on new and renewable energies. So, but if we change this policy, that means if we change systematically certain policies, then we will create more than 9.1 lakhs of employment, which will not be a challenge because then we will be able to shift from coal based to non-coal based over a period of time. The employment that is dependent on coal can be gradually translated to non-core dependent employment. So, we are also solving the employment crisis. At the same time, we are able to generate from the RE potential and probably reduce at least GHG emission. At the end user, you are able to do it. The similar example I can give for the mobility one where we have EVs coming up, right? Now, to reduce the PM 2.5, PM 10, that is fine because you are not emitting in Delhi. Delhi is the best example. But you are emitting elsewhere, right? When you produce it, you are emitting elsewhere. So, the challenge is not only to emit on road when you commute, the challenge is also to emit at the source. So, if we come out of at least business as usual scenario to some aggressive policy scenario, there is quite a bit of space where we can not only achieve the net zero of 40% targets of India that is committed for 2024, but we can also create employment in this case. But then again, everything comes down to what I started in the session, that is the X minus M problem, which is basically the import-export problem. So, X is the export, M stands for the import. This is a standard equation used in economics. X stands for export and M stands for import. And if you look at the 2030 India, then look at how the expected increase will happen by 2030 in terms of import burden for India. That's given in the India figure, which is basically in 2030, we will reduce our import to 21% if we adopt certain policies of creating a mix of energy not only through import but also developing our own source of energy or our own technology related to new energy scenarios that India can happen. Now, this argument of 21 reduction is essentially important because the argument of energy security comes into picture. You don't have to store a lot of energy, right? If you produce within economy, you don't have to basically store a lot of energy. You don't have to import on a daily basis. You don't have to come up with your own refinery factories, which is again polluting in nature, right? You get crude oil and then you convert into the derivatives, and when you convert into the derivatives, then you sell it off. Financially looks wonderful, right? I am happy about it as an economist, but we pollute in our ecosystem and we have to again come up with a new policy how to reduce it. So, these energy mix would not only help in reducing GHG gas emissions, but they will also reduce the import burden of 9, which is around 51% comes out in terms of decimal points. If you take it, it comes around 51% of reduction, which means that we will encourage ourselves to import less. We become energy producers in India. Like Bangladesh is a classic case. If you have read the newspapers, we were importing to Bangladesh, Bhutan and other economies. So, when there is a geopolitical realignment happens, we can control some of them by not giving them electricity or charging more for the electricity, right? Or asking them to repay the loan that they have taken already. Yeah. So we can realign the policies because we become energy producers. So, there is a word called consumer plus producer, prosumers, right? Energy is a part which comes as a prosumer and India has to become a prosumer. not only a consumer because we are importing it. That leads to the energy security argument, where ensuring reliable, economically viable and environmentally sustainable energy access for all citizens. Yes, so if we agree, all countries, if we agree the 17 sustainable development goals, 18 is on the way coming up, right? So yes, every economy has to accept, because if India becomes energy secure and import less, then Middle East will have a problem, because Middle East is dependent completely on their export of fossil fuels. And please look at the data of last 5 years. These economies, which are oil exporting economies, were only exporting oil for a very long time. So they did not have a portfolio diversification of their business. Today, if you look at, they started diversifying their portfolio, because the threat is, what if India become energy secure? So economies which were completely dependent on exporting oil and started exporting crude oil later on, they are now rethinking about the strategy, because if one economy which is highly consuming changes its sustainable development policy through coming up with energy mix and producing within economy, oil exporting economy has to rethink to diversify their portfolio, because it is going to change the complete trade pattern of economies that we talk about. One of the case I can tell you, China recently, for a very short period, they said we are not going to encourage any recyclable industries, right? Because they were expecting some sanctions, and the first move they said that, because they have the monopoly of recyclable industries. Suddenly India started a new policy that we will have a recyclable industry in India. So that become a threat to China, right? And that become a stronger idea to again come back to one stage, Brazil, China, India and Russia, to discuss about how we can aggressively work on recyclable industries generation and stuff. And because India and China are the predominantly main consumers of energy, when these two economies will change their policies, it would create a complete change in the way we look at trade. The other example is electric vehicle is the best example in this case. Electric vehicle was in use in the Eastern Asian regions, right? It was not a very new thing that was invented and in practice in last 2-3 years in India. It was there in Japan, it was there in Taiwan, the people were using it. Of course, they were not directed and advised to use it, but they were choosing to use it. Today, when India started using, when the consumer base has become really strong, right, and people have realized that the cost per unit of kilometer transport is lesser, they don't care about the emissions, they care about how much money goes from their pocket, right. The EV industry is aggressively growing in India as it is growing in the other part. India is able to export. So these two economies, because of densely populated, high demand, competing market forces and liberalized economy, has helped reshaping the international trade patterns. And if we agree on this and come up with techno-economic policy, again I repeat, economic policy is not enough. So technologists and economists have to sit down together to think about a policy. Then the world order would change in terms of how you are exporting, how you are importing, right? Sustainable business, sustainable building practices, right? We learn it from others, right? And then we do it in India. Now, if that becomes a forte of India to come up with technology for sustainable construction, it will have a direct impact on the world order in terms of the demand for such goods and services and how you can change in your particular segment. Now, these are the 4 pillars that we talk about. One is reliability and risk. Because why risk is here? Because a lot of people are talking about risk of hydrogen when it is traded between the countries, inside the countries from point A to point B. What is the risk associated with? Because even if there are scientific literature that says there is no risk, but the problem is there is something called a behavioral change. We need to have a behavioral change. We don't think LPG is a problem, right? Even if that's also a problematic carrier, we are okay with it because historically for some years we have been doing it. There is no great report that comes that suddenly there is a blown up of the cylinder has happened. So we need some understanding of the risk part in terms of the supply. But reliability is a question. That means, can we create as much energy sources from our domestic industries to support the domestic economy. Like which industry would be able to create hydrogen, for instance? Identify those. Instead of creating a complete industry setup for hydrogen generation, which industries in the process of the product can help generating hydrogen? That would be much more efficient way to look at instead of identifying creating one industry for that. But then again we need a lot of studies to identify that the risk and uncertainty is minimized and it is better to use in different purposes starting from probably household to non-household use. Of course, economics is important, per unit cost of energy is highly important given India is a case because again it's a behavioral problem. We are never trained to pay for electricity charges, right? Electricity is just like free. We don't mind going to a hotel and pay 3000 rupees for a dinner, but when your EB bill comes 400 rupees, then there is a fight at home. Because energy has never been considered as a product. Why? Because you don't feel it, right? That human feel is not there unless you touch a 440 volt wire. You don't feel it as a product. That's the first principle how price makes people change their mindset. So, one of the problem is DISCOM has gone in loss because people don't pay. Forget about people, industries don't pay. Many industries shut down because they said we can't pay electricity bills. There are sectors where electricity is free. There are sectors where electricity is subsidized. There are sectors where electricity is paid at a higher cost. So, there is an inequality in the pricing of electricity because we understood the utility of energy, but we never understood the price of energy, and the energy is a commodity and energy was not traded. Another important part here, it was never traded systematically from the day of NSE and BSE got established, it is traded recently. And when it started traded? 2012 when Government of India signed a document of Clean Development Mechanism, MCX company, there is a company called MCX that started trading electricity. Because trading electricity is again difficult, right? How do you trade? It's a flow. Unless you store it, trade becomes difficult. And battery science was not that great at that point in time. It's again evolving, as we know that battery science is evolving at a larger scale in last 10 years. But it was not traded like a good, I trade it to one particular place because it is not a good that you can actually visibly see. So, economics is important, which definitely depends on the cost effectiveness. That means how much I pay per unit of electricity generated and consumed, and is there a viability of those kind of technology. This is exactly where comes, we innovate 100 technologies, but all 100 technology may not be economically viable to be adopted at the policy level or society level. Access is important. Of course, the Government of India documentation completes that we are achieving 100% rural electrification, but that doesn't solve the problem of electrification at each household level. That's also a challenge because there are certain households who do not have the ability to purchase. That's where the GDP argument comes in. Unless you create an ability to purchase, there will be no demand for any particular goods and services. And if we talk about the reliability, economics, access, then we can actually talk about the sustainability of energy intensity and emissions. Because all these three somehow are connected to the definition of sustainability. So, when I say sustainability, please do not always think that environmental sustainability. Will that energy sustain for some years to go? Can we achieve a standardization of a product? Will technology help in consuming those goods and services for a long period of time? So, one is sustainability of business, one is sustainability of the ecosystem. Our problem is to solve the problem related to sustainability of ecosystem through sustainability of business. So, once we can clarify policies in terms of reliability, risk, cost of production, acceptability, behavioral change that comes from individual households, sector specific, increase the access of consumers of modern energy sources, we cannot talk about the sustainability parameters. In an urban area, almost everyone is using LPG. right? Cylinders. In rural area, what is the percentage of that? Even if Ujjwala scheme was promoting cylinders for every household, the adaptability is less. So people use it only for a specific purpose, a religious purpose, they will keep it and they will use it. All other purpose they are depending on the fossil fuel. Right? Now look at the kerosene policy in India. Kerosene is a part of PDS. PDS is public distribution system, given to people who cannot afford bottom of the pyramid. But when the policy was created, it is clearly mentioned that kerosene sold in a rural India should be or advised to use for lighting purpose. For urban area, it is advisable to use for cooking purpose. What we did? We used in automobiles, trucks, right? We innovated, we are good innovators in terms of, reverse engineering process. Then government added a color and changed it to, a different color to identify it. So a new policy has to be intervened, correct? What is the purpose? The purpose is rural India did not have electricity, therefore lighting is important. Urban India do not have fossil fuel, therefore kerosene is important for cooking. So the policy, unless clearly comes in terms of the implementation, that becomes a problem. And that's where we have to have these three pillars to reach to the sustainability dialogue that we talk about, reducing energy intensity and reducing emissions. So if we talk about that, these are the challenges we have. One challenge that is definitely carbon intensity. There is a lot of literature, you guys can go and search related to carbon productivity. So there is a new strand of literature in economics that has come. Carbon productivity means for 1 unit of output, how much carbon you are emitting. That answers her question, how to price it, right? Now if I come up with a product which emits more in India, I come up with a product which emits less in China, what should be my strategy? And what should be the appropriate price mechanism to basically regulate these industries which are emitting more per unit of output they produce, and are they reducing over a period of time? And trust me, we are only talking about emission. There is a set of things which is related to waste generation. Government of India has come up in 2016 a policy which classifies Indian industry into 4 categories based on the waste generated. Red category, orange category, yellow category and white category. So white categories are the firm who are generating less waste. Again, this waste generation is not linked with the emission categories. So when we talk only about emission reduction, the challenge is first is carbon intensity, which means how much carbon we emit per product delivered into the market, which largely is a value chain problem also. So the value chain problem is, you produce a good in, let's say, Jammu and Kashmir, same good you transport, sell it in Kerala. So it's not only the cost of production and the production emission that is linked in the factory, it also the mile that is taken for transportation, right? Trucks are the backbone of India. If you look at the production chain, trucks are the backbone of India. So what is important is decarbonize the trucks first, because they emit locally, which adds up with the emission in the factory level, right? So that's where eliminating the first mile road connectivity challenge. So that means industries should be interlinked in such a way. There is a set of literature that you can look at, networking of industries or agglomerations of industries, right? Now look at textile industries. We have 3 or 4 pockets in India, right? One is Tirupur, Chennai based cluster, then we have West Bengal jute clusters, then we have Ahmedabad cluster. Look at motor pump segment. Again, Chennai has a large cluster. NCR, National Capital Region, has a large cluster. Indore region has a large cluster. Which essentially means creating clusters are good for economic activity, but not for sustainable economic policies, because we have to create clusters not only in 4 zones, but we have to come up with industrial policy that encourage this small cluster in every state, because then the transportation burden of emission would also reduce. So carbon intensity is one challenge, because that's the prime variable that I am interested to look at, whether an industry or a firm is able to reduce per amount of carbon emitted as they produce a goods and services in the market. Then we can think about the appropriate policies, saying that okay, we will increase the price because the carbon emission is relatively high. Import dependence, we have already discussed about it. Risk to investment, why should I invest in a hydrogen valley? What is my incentive? Because unless I know the economic benefit and incentive as a businessman or a businesswoman, then I am not ready to invest in such avenues. Now that is also linked to two important, maybe 2 more minutes I will take, or 3 minutes. That is linked to 2 more important investment patterns. One is foreign direct investment. Second is domestic investment. Now, unless the technology has confirmed that I do not have risk and uncertainty in the production chain and there is a market for it, FDI will not come. That is, foreign direct investment will not come. If foreign direct investment will not come, then even if you have the technology, it will not become profitable, because today Indian industries or any industries are suffering from financial constraints. So that would have a problem in terms of risk to investment. And if there is a risk to investment, it will have a monopoly structure. Monopoly means there will be one industry which will start producing everything and distributing everything, the price rise will increase. Zinc is a beautiful example for that, right? Few of you might have heard this zinc story. How many zinc factories we have? Notable zinc factories. Any idea? Majority stake. All of us know Hindustan Zinc, right? Except the Adani Zinc which has come recently. Can you tell third company? Which has a good share in zinc market? Vedanta, right? Vedanta also recently added, right? Now look at how monopoly structure happens. So when monopoly happens, then price rise will go up, economics will not play around, and the individuals and industries have to pay more for the new technology that is coming in, and therefore they will not accept the new technology. Of course, that is where the Government of India policy is there, something called Competition Commission of India. Competition Commission of India understands where the monopoly happens and how to destroy monopoly so that market competition will go up. And end of the day, before I finish the talk, innovation is crucial. Innovation is classified as R&D, in-house R&D, R&D outside India, embodied technology import, disembodied technology import through drawing, design, footprint, creation of intellectual property rights, working with the industry academia challenges. Otherwise what happens, that becomes an inadequate innovation which may not help us in achieving the standard target of net zero by 2070 or 2047, depending on the different challenges that we have.